First of all, thank you, Reiner, for inviting me, and thank you, Marianne and Nick, for the referral to the conference. I'm Jay Heisler. I'm a journalist and I'm a part-time academic. I teach Mad Studies at an art college in Canada called Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, which has been around since the 1800s, and it was the first Canadian art college to federate into a university that offers four-year undergraduate degrees. So my students are undergraduate students. I've also taught mental health advocacy. Mad Studies is a mental health advocacy course. I've also taught mental health advocacy to continuing ed students at continuing education students at Dalhousie University in Canada. I think that was an elective in the police leadership program for RCMP and Halifax Regional Police and other police agencies across Canada, and also was an elective in the public safety communicator program for people studying to be managerial roles in ambulance dispatchers and 911 dispatchers and police dispatchers and stuff like that. So I've been teaching mental health advocacy in that capacity for now 4 years. And I've also been writing as a journalist for Voice of America. I'm Voice of America's Canada correspondent. Voice of America is a U.S. government employer, but I get paid just $500 an article. I'm not a salaried U.S. government employee. I've also been published in CNBC, NBC News' finance branch, in the Washington Examiner, the third biggest newspaper in D.C., U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings, a couple of Canadian think tanks, Policy Insights Forum, Canadian Global Affairs Institute, and I was also a music journalist in the Canadian newspapers. This is all kind of a backlog of things that occurred in the last kind of 5 years or so. Before that, I worked as a journalist in Lebanon and Tbilisi, Georgia, and right out of journalism school, and then went back to try grad school. I did a master's and paused 2 attempts at a PhD before my mental health got in the way. Yeah, I've had a winding path, and a very kind of diverse background, like Reiner has alluded to, and I'm here to teach everyone about Mad Studies. So Mad Studies is Reiner, you can see me change the slide just
yeah,
now,
if you
right?
go to the next, click on this, click on the next slide. Yeah, that'll be fine. If you click on this, double click.
I did click on the next slide. Can you see it?
No, I can't. All right, yeah, that's it moved. Don't worry about that. Go back. Yeah, that's fine. Same in different style. Yeah, that's fine. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, cool. So Mad Studies is in the post-Foucault academic environment. Every marginalized group gets studies, basically, to put it in layman's terms. And so Michel Foucault came from France over to the United States and invented critical theory, spearheaded critical theory, working with the work of other theorists such as Gramsci and Derrida, largely European. And this took off at the American Academy when combined with identity politics, such as a growing movement from African American activists to have African American studies being taught in American universities, and Hispanic activists and women's rights activists having gender studies get taught in American universities. So this mix between the theory end coming from Europe and the activist end coming from North America meant every marginalized group got a department, basically. And lagging behind this is the study of people with a mental health history. Mad Studies is attempting to patch that up. Mad Studies is the study of people with a mental health history as if another marginalized group, such as gender, sexual orientation, race, etc. And Mad Studies is seen as basically one of the coolest new fields in academia. It's only around 15 years old, and it's seen as a very kind of cool, new, exciting field. It has some growing pains. So since I started teaching the Mad Studies, it took off very fast. For example, a Mad Studies master's program started in Scotland, I believe where Reiner said he is. In Scotland at Queen Margaret University, there was a Mad Studies master's program that was started last year, but then it folded. It folded a year later So we just found out a month or two ago that they collapsed that program. So yeah, so it's got some growing pains. It's growing very fast. Math studies went from being taught only in one university in Toronto to being taught across Europe, Canada, Australia, and the United States. I'm still one of the only professors of Mad Studies in Canada, which is the origin country of Mad Studies. The founders are Canadian. The people I know personally, the original Mad Studies textbook was written by Jeffrey Room and Catherine Church, who have mentored me in starting my course. And we last time I spoke to them, we were working on a letter to Queen Margaret University about restarting their Mad Studies master's program. And also Brenda LaFrancois, who's also based out here in Atlantic, Canada with me. Math Studies is so rare that Brenda doesn't actually teach a Math Studies course necessarily, but teaches a course of Math Studies elements to nurses and social workers. That shows the versatility of Math Studies, is that it's being taught to nurses and social workers in Canada. And so, but not across the board. There are many nursing and social work programs across Canada do not teach it, just some do. Some out here in Atlantic Canada where I'm based. The term MAD, M-A-D, is not capitalized, all three letters. It's just the first letter is capitalized, in line with critical theory, normal critical theory structure for marginalized groups' identity. Identity labels are tricky. They move around. It used to be that you would say, for example, person with autism. Now it is preferred that you say autistic person. The autistic community prefers you say autistic person and not person with autism. Autism activism is growing. It's tangential to Mad Studies. It is covered by Mad Studies, but it's not necessarily seen as a competing field, or it's not necessarily seen as the same field. There's an effort by autism studies activists to include MAD activists, but it's not. The two coexist, and Mad Studies for the most part hasn't followed critical autism studies down a couple of rabbit holes it's gone down. For example, if you're on LinkedIn and you're active in DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion circles on LinkedIn, you might have noticed sometimes largely white disability studies and critical autism studies, DEI people are picking fights with other marginalized groups, such as the Black Lives Matter people. And it's really horrible. It's something I really don't like to see. And so for the most part, people with bipolar and schizophrenia and depression have stayed out of that, and the Mad Studies circles have stayed out of that fight and not really taking the side of the disability studies people picking fights with Black Lives Matter people, which I'm really happy to see. We really should stay out of that, and I'm really unhappy that kind of fracture is happening in DEI. Mad Studies doesn't necessarily even see itself as DEI to begin with. I always say that I wouldn't consider myself DEI because I'm not out to take a Black woman's job. I'm just here to help people with a mental health history advocate for their rights in the workplace, and that's often an accommodations issue, which is a legal issue more than it's a DEI issue or a workplace bullying issue. And so
what's DEI? Sorry, what DEI stands for?
It's the American term for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, as we know, it came about after the Black Lives Matter protests over the death of George Floyd, and it became and there's a DEI office sprouted up in every major American corporation, and is now a normal term in the U.S. and Canada and in the UK and Australia. I don't know how it's permeated into the rest of Europe, but it's now a day-to-day fact of corporate life. That wave has kind of crashed and rolled back, to paraphrase Hunter S. Thompson. So a lot of the DEI jobs are being lost, and a lot of the DEI departments were the first to be cut during the tech layoffs that kind of started over the last 12 months or more, really. And so the tech layoffs really cut a lot of DEI jobs, and and so with that, there's become a kind of issue where people are fighting over the remaining scraps of the career path. About 2 years ago, there was 1 trillion DEI people on LinkedIn, and DEI consultants, DEI coaches, and that has turned into a really nasty situation where a lot of people are losing their jobs and fighting over the remaining opportunities. Seeing people GoFundMe to keep a roof over their heads is pretty normal now. And so Mad Studies is staying out of all of that, primarily because bipolar and schizophrenia are too incompatible with DEI in the workplace, because most employers refuse to touch the issue. They refuse to continue hiring or maintaining the employment of people with bipolar or schizophrenia. And so it never really became a real DEI field. And so additionally, most Mad Studies people see themselves as activists, and in the workplace they deal with legal, like accommodations as a legal concept, or as a workplace bullying concept, and then not necessarily as a DEI concept. And so Mad Studies is primarily an academic field, so it's now academic research. It's an activist field, now workplace activism, and it's about changing the dialogue around mental health on a street level. It's also a creative field. Mad art is a big part of art, and of course I teach in an art college, and so it's about seeing ways that people can explore their identity in art. To skip ahead to some of my artists from the course I teach. Can everyone see this?
Yeah, sure. Student artwork, Emma Jordan.
Yeah, Emma Jordan is an artist who works with issues of trauma, and this is a painting she did blindfolded. I have a lot of paintings from my former students, but I just got prints. I teach part-time, so I just buy prints of them. And I have dozens of prints just lying around my apartment. One of them was Emma's, and one of them is Amy's. It was Amy Crosby. Amy Crosby, since taking my course and doing this really amazing work of art for my course, we're talking about her severe anxiety issues. Amy has gone on to be a newspaper illustrator for a newspaper in Ontario. And also Amy has worked academic jobs. Amy is she has a really interesting career, and her work was featured in local media. So there's cool stuff going on. And there's Ivan Flores, who became who worked on fashion design, and went on to Ivan's from Puerto Rico, and is currently working sewing the containers for golf balls. There's a company that sews those, and so Ivan used his sewing knowledge to get a job there while he pursues fashion design after his graduation. So as you can tell, there's a lot of cool kind of ways to find employment if you have a mental health history, and art is a good way to do that. A lot of my students are severely mentally ill. It's stayed in a psychiatric institution. Some of them are drug users, sex workers, formerly incarcerated, people in really nasty custody disputes if they're middle-aged, stuff like that. And so art offers a life and also a paycheck for people who can't hold down a 9-to-5 job. And so teaching Mad Studies in an art college is a natural fit, and it's a very popular course. This last year, there was a double-digit wait list to get in. There was a wait list of 10, over 10 for a course with a cap on 40. And so it's a small art college. It's a small college. It's only a few hundred students. So I was pretty happy with that. And so you're looking at a pretty exciting opportunity for students, and it's definitely something I'm happy to keep teaching, even as my career kind of progresses, and as I publish in bigger and bigger like journalism outlets. So here are the core textbooks. We can send out the slides after, I'm sure, if we can email the slides to anyone who wants them, or just take a screenshot. These are the textbooks. Everyone can see that. These are the textbooks of essays that I've been teaching out of for my course. These are I recommend all of them. I mean, these are the coolest textbooks on mental health you're going to find. I just got a new one actually that just arrived in the mail yesterday. It was a new book. But Mad Matters is Canadian. The Routledge International Handbook of Mad Studies is based between Canada and the UK. The Routledge International Handbook of Critical Autism Studies is international, and that includes a lot of voices from around the world, including the developing world. While Mad Matters is mostly based around Canada, the Routledge International Handbook of Mad Studies has chapters about Africa, India, Peru. It's pretty cool. The Routledge International Handbook of Critical Autism Studies, true to my criticism of the field earlier, tends to be more focused on the Anglosphere, US, Canada, the UK, Australia. But there is some stuff, international stuff in it, and some intersectional feminism in it and stuff like that. So I would recommend these 3 textbooks. These are really interesting, and they're going to give you a really kind of a good overview of give you kind of a really good overview of the field. So if there's a chat, I can share links to them or whatever. So the core issues of Mad Studies are media representation, media language and discourse, policing, survival-led reform to psychiatry, intersectionality, and solidarity with other marginalized identities. Especially the last one. Mad Studies is cognizant that it is driven by largely educated white North Americans, and is seen as a way to express solidarity with other groups and to be present at the table without interfering with the other marginalized groups and their kind of their push for justice over their issues. And so solidarity with other groups is seen as core to Mad Studies. It's not fighting over pieces of the same pie. And so that is where Mad Studies has also managed to avoid getting into the trap of fighting over scraps as DEI rolls back. And so you aren't considered a good Mad Studies scholar unless you're prioritizing other marginalized groups and their and supporting them in their work. So survivor-led reform to psychiatry is the gist of Mad Studies, really. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of more radical scholars refer to themselves as anti-psychiatry. I don't. I have a more conservative take, but Catherine Church says that's fine. My students seem to prefer it. You'd think at an art college they'd be more radical, but I think at an art college, when everybody has stuff like in the background, like drug use, sex work, custody battles, prison, the inability to hold down a 9-to-5 job, I think they prefer the more pragmatic approach, actually, instead of perhaps like an English department at a top tier like Ivory Tower University, where you probably get everyone calling in anti-psychiatry and everyone talking about tearing down the biomedical paradigm and burning the DSM and stuff like that. And so my approach is seen as a little more conservative, but I do teach readings that have the rest of that in it. Perhaps that is where the Queen Margaret University department in Edinburgh, not in Edinburgh, in Scotland, the Queen Margaret University in Scotland might have failed partly due to that having that kind of radicalism, because it doesn't really connect with a lot of people, and it's seen as kind of out of touch, and it's also seen as white feminism, and so it's a give and take where you have the radicals in the movement, and then you have the more kind of pragmatic side where you're training police and nurses and social workers, and where you're training psychiatrists. Actually, like I know a psychiatrist who's familiar with Mad Studies already. The psychiatrist who consults on Chicago Med, which is a TV show in the United States on one of the major networks, Their staff psychiatrist who consults for the screenwriters, and he's a screenwriter himself, contacted me, and he was familiar with Mad Studies already, and was able to speak in basic Mad Studies discourse. So if you're a Hollywood psychiatrist, at least you know Mad Studies already. And so policing for policing Mad Studies, of course, in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, tends to be pretty anti-police, but nobody in Mad Studies cared that I was teaching police mental health advocacy, because there is an interest in teaching police PTSD reform as on a policy level, and also sensitivity dealing with the public. And so policing is also interesting to Mad Studies scholars because it's a big part of the life of people with a mental health history. Aside from solidarity with racialized minorities, there's also the fact that a Caucasian person with schizophrenia or bipolar is significantly over-policed and often bears the brunt of policing in many American and Canadian cities, and probably European cities as well. So somebody with a mental health history, similar to somebody who's a racialized minority, will bear the brunt of policing. And so examining that and kind of deconstructing that and looking for ways to reform that is a big part of Mad Studies. And so that includes media, language, and discourse. Now, there's something I was going to say about policing. What was it? It'll come back to me. And so media, language, and discourse is important. A couple of films got canceled. I know everybody hates cancel culture now, but a couple of films are a no-go. Do not talk to somebody with a mental health history about the film Split. The film Split by M. Night Shyamalan is seen as a highly dubious take on schizophrenia and multiple and dissociative identity disorder. It's seen as an incredibly stigmatizing film. And there's an effort to get it banned from Netflix. Seen as a really horrible film. I refused to see it when it came out. And also the film Music. Critical autism studies scholars don't really like the film Music by Sia. There's a huge backlash to it. And is one of those are the two biggest kind of controversies in film. And so Hollywood is seen as a real enemy, actually, to Mad Studies and to critical autism studies. There's a lot of really discriminatory and really kind of demonizing content. As I teach in my course, Mad Studies is the only, mental health is the only marginalized group where in a Hollywood film, it is a horror movie twist to reveal that somebody possesses it. So I thought this person was not mentally ill, but it turns out they are mentally ill, is usually a reveal in a film accompanied with like shrieking violins and thunder crashing outside and stuff like that. It's and this includes also news media. And so so there's a stat rolling around that violence in the United States is only interpersonal violence in the United States is only 4% attributable directly to a mental health episode, and the rest might be committed by somebody with a mental illness, but usually has a conventional criminal motive. This fits my observations researching violence from the mentally ill for Treatment Advocacy Center, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit lobby on mental health issues. So for the most part, policing policy and media policy towards mental health is misguided because the majority of violence by the mentally ill is by the poor or the gang affiliated or people who are otherwise committing crimes, and then being mentally ill is proportionate to the fact that mental illness appears in those subcultures disproportionately because of pressures of poverty or drug use or being unhoused. And so for the most part, mental health has become a scapegoat. It's become a scapegoat also because it's become a scapegoat on both sides of the political spectrum. The right likes scapegoating mental health because it talks about ways that the individual can be reached through the relationship with God or the relationship with themselves and the police, and this amount of hours to the individual. And the left likes blaming everything on mental health. because it takes the pressure off the individual, it takes the blame off the individual. It's a system that failed them. And either way, it both contribute to the demonization of the mentally ill, and an attempt to shift the blame for every type of social ill onto mental illness and the mentally ill. Yeah, and so I mean, a lot of even mass shootings are often motivated by white supremacist ideology, incel ideology, internet subcultures, and so for the most part, the media is happy to blame mental illness, even when it turned out to be ISIS. Actually, a couple of ISIS attacks were blamed on mental illness. So you can blame anything under the sun on mental illness and get away with it probably in the American media, and in the Canadian media. So I'm sorry, but like nice European academics are definitely going to say the same thing to me over a glass of wine. So I'm definitely everyone's sick of hearing it in the Mad Studies community. So other core issues, mental health advocacy. Some examples from the original Mad Studies textbook for Canada is how group housing for the mentally ill was zoned to restrict how many mentally ill would end up in each neighborhood. This likely increased the population of the unhoused. There's now an exploding homeless population in Canada and the United States, partially due to NIMBYism, NIMBY, not my backyard. NIMBYism around group housing for the mentally ill has led to a lack of affordable housing options. And then there was one incident so extreme where in Toronto, where the neighbors were sick of looking at the mentally ill people staying in a group home, so they had the windows boarded up, so there was no sun like got into the group home. This is in Canada, so like it's definitely disturbing stuff. So yeah, it is it can be really heavy. It can be a really heavy duty field, and it can be a lot to take in. But definitely like oh yeah, I remember what I was going to say. Well, when I say sensitivity training, I prefer seeing it as advocacy and not sensitivity training. Sensitivity training involves taking in people without mental illnesses and training them to not be discriminatory. I prefer not to do that. Advocacy involves taking people with mental illnesses and training them to fight for their rights. I prefer to do that instead. From my experience, people who enter a course in mental health advocacy because they had problems in the workplace where people with a mental health history felt they were being discriminatory or hurtful or bullying, and they come into my course, they aren't going to change for the better necessarily, and they're just going to be a spoiler for everybody else. And it can turn the whole thing into a really nasty environment. And so so I'm happy to focus on the mentally ill students and making sure that they have a good understanding of what their rights are and how to fight for the rights in the workplace and in the community. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So concerns about other core issues are concerns about policing and incarceration. Mental health. I could say the Canadian mental health system is pretty good. Every time I see images of a mental hospital in like the deep south in the United States or even like Pennsylvania or something, I am horrified by how bad it looks and how nasty the environment looks. I did have to check myself into emergency mental health care, but it was in Portland, Oregon, and so it was a nice hospital there. And I think it's probably one of the darker problems in the United States is that the mental health system is failing everybody. Additionally, there's concerns about electroconvulsive therapy. In Mad Studies, there's a general consensus that we're against ECT. It's seen as due to the memory loss issue, which, well, I know the psychiatry community says memory loss from ECT isn't proven. Anecdotally, most people in the Mad Studies community know somebody who's had ECT, and nearly all claim to have experienced some kind of memory loss. And so ECT is unpopular. I'm not a scientist. I do not know the answer to that, but nor have I experienced ECT, nor do I know personally somebody who's had ECT. But in my class, it's normal for somebody to say that their like cousin had ECT and has memory loss now and stuff like that. And that includes non-mentally ill students saying stuff like that. So ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, is very unpopular in mad studies, and is seen as a kind of sore issue. So neurodiversity, which is the critical, neurodiversity is a different concept from mad studies. Neurodiversity is the workplace concept and that was originally meant to encapsulate just ADHD, autism, and other non-pathological brain disorders, like such as not specifically bipolar schizophrenia. That has changed. Neurodiversity now is the meaning of it has changed to mean mental illness, bipolar schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, whereas it didn't before. There was even an attempt to form a competing field to mad studies called neurodiversity studies, based out of the UK and Europe, that failed after a single textbook was released and never really caught on. And that was right before the UK pivoted and tried to start a mad studies master's program instead, and then release the Routledge International Handbook of Mad Studies. I'm happy the UK came about to endorse a Canadian soft power institution and a North American soft power institution, really, instead of trying to replace it with something homegrown. The World Economic Forum helped break the idea of neurodiversity by sharing articles about it in the early days of it as a concept. It's a originally, like I said, neurodiversity as a field did not include mental illness. Now it does, but it does in the activist use of the term. It's hard to tell whether Wall Street or whether Bay Street in Canada, or whether whatever the London equivalent of Wall Street and Bay Street are. It's hard to tell whether they have updated their views to include mental illness and neurodiversity. I've noticed in the workplace there's a reluctance to talk about mental illness, and so much so I had a student who was in a DEI job in a government field, I'm not going to say what, who whenever workplace rights came up would only talk about autistic workers, would only talk about autistic employees. And when I asked specifically about mentally ill employees, she would respond, "Oh yes, well, as I was saying," and then just go right back to talking about autistic employees. There's a resistance to talking about mentally ill employees, and there's a hesitance because it's such a hot button topic in a workplace because of how much accommodations are required, how much time off work somebody would need, and what kind of workplace environment would result. That for the most part, there's a deliberate attempt to deflect to neurodiversity from mental illness. There's a deliberate attempt to deflect to ADHD and autism as the only issues being examined. It might be another reason why autism ended up being a pivotal DEI field, and schizophrenia and bipolar never did. The literature on neurodiversity shows that many neurodivergent people are more creative. The literature on mental health and art shows many people with disorders such as bipolar are more creative. Going back to cave paintings, I have an academic journal article, and I believe it's like a psychiatric journal, that said that there's evidence that cave paintings were by schizophrenic artists. The correct terms are neurodiversity implies including the neurotypical. Neurodivergent means somebody with ADHD, autism, something like that. Neurodivergent means you possess a different brain type. Neurotypical means you do not, and neurodiversity is the combination of all of those. So it is actually a common misunderstanding. People say, "I am neurodiverse," or neurodiverse people. Everybody is neurodiverse. Neurodivergent is people who are neurodivergent, people who have a different brain type, and neurotypical is people who do not. However, this is frequently used the opposite way. There's actually an exciting new book coming out called Black and Neurodiverse. So you can use it you can use it differently. You can use it. That's just the attempt is to standardize the terminology I just told you, but not everybody's using it. And so I'm happy with either. If students can say either in my course, but I always talk about the debate over terminology. My personal view is that lacking a historical basis in persecution over the language, or at least the specifics of the language, I don't feel like I have a right to get offended if somebody says neurodiverse instead of neurodivergent. And not everybody feels that way. It's normal to see somebody corrected on LinkedIn. Yeah, I can say that there is a historical basis for persecution among other aspects of language, hence Mad Studies, the very name of Mad Studies itself. And also the DSM is unpopular not only because of what is seen as an attempt to kind of coerce people with a mental illness through over labeling and over prescribing, but it's also unpopular because it originally included, I believe, transphobic content, like to be transsexual was seen as something in the DSM until relatively recently. And so it is there's an overlap with queer studies. As a straight white man, I'm rare in Mad Studies, let alone in a critical theory field about marginalized groups. Although I'll note that there's a lot of stuff people were doing before that I would never do, that people can do anymore. In the United States, a course at a university in the U.S. made headlines being about Beyonce, the musical artist, and that was actually taught by like a white guy. I mean, I was shocked at the time, and everyone's shocked now. You can never do that now. So identity politics is a big part of it. I wouldn't wade into Mad Studies or a discussion of it unless you're well versed in identity politics and critical theory. And so neurodiversity today, there's a ongoing controversy over terminology. As I said, there's a white feminism problem. Yeah, so I guess to talk about ways as psychiatrists you could benefit from this. Now I can say I wouldn't be overly cautious about it. Just know that it's something coming up in culture, and it is spreading pretty fast into the developing world and in Europe. In the Mad Studies Facebook group, you've got people being like, "Hey, I'm in Sweden. Is there a Mad Studies presence?" And you've got people commenting to be like, "We're trying to grow one. It keeps sprouting up and getting knocked down." And so it is definitely like it is definitely something that is growing, and it's definitely like it's definitely something that is something that is not entirely what it could be yet, but is growing very fast and is spreading into the developing world and into Europe. The biggest names in the field as far as activism, one of them is Matthew Jackman, who I know, who was going to guest lecture on my course but got sick. He's based in Australia and is a social work student, and is the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and the UN have all hired Matt to talk about Mad Studies. And then there's Matt Baudette, who runs one of the only Mad art galleries in the world, and I believe the only Mad art gallery in the United States, out of Chicago. And Matt did guest lecture on my course and gave a virtual tour of the gallery. So there's lots of exciting folk. Madeline Jekyll is a Mad Studies scholar based out of Rutgers University in the New Jersey suburbs of New York. We're going to give a panel together this summer. We're planning one, and we want to work on a history project where I would help research it and stuff like that. We should have a U.S. government grant. So there's yeah, it's a lot of it's about networking and the community getting to know each other. Yeah, we see exciting things could happen. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's I'm grateful for the opportunity to teach Mad Studies on an undergraduate level, and I believe it's been a great opportunity, and I'm looking forward to keep doing it for the rest of my career. My students are great. It's a really healthy environment. I was told there was a toxic environment problem in some Mad Studies programs, but not in mine. I get near universally positive student reviews, and everyone seems to speak really highly of the course. So, Reiner, you have a question?
Yeah, I think one of my questions would be how can we work together, or what's the way of working together? Do you know what I mean? So just get confuse you with my own views. All right.
Well,
Okay.
I
I
can
think the
say that
question is how would working together look like? So what is it, what we want to do, what we could do. So let's say that way, anti-psychiatry is, for example, was very often psychiatrists who were leading, and it was in Italy in the 70s, or we had this Lang here in Scotland. But I think we have all these opportunities, of where the power is changed and the power effects are different. So what could be done better now?
I can say that the involvement of psychiatrists and psychologists in the anti-psychiatry was controversial. Originally, it was seen as welcome development, but then it was seen as co-opting the movement. So it's seen kind of skeptically. However, I think it's really important. I think a lot of mostly mentally ill people who are activists in Mad Studies say they prefer having a psychiatrist, and they see their psychiatrist as a personal choice, but one that's important to them. I nearly married a psychiatrist myself. She did work with the police too, actually. And so I have no grounds to complain, but that puts me in a unique position to say that I can say that the best thing a psychiatrist can do is not necessarily try to be overly woke. If you're a psychiatrist, the best thing you can do is not necessarily try to speak in activist jargon. That might undermine trust. That's just between us. If you're seen as like patronizing or sucking up or trying to co-opt the movement, I think the best thing you could do is instead just be cognizant about the humanity of the person you're talking to, and maybe refer to them to those resources if they have an interest in it. So you're familiar with the resources yourself. They develop an interest in those resources. You can have a familiarity with them enough to refer them to them. I think your job as a psychiatrist is not to be an activist, and is not to try to involve yourself in the activist movement. But if you have a basic knowledge of the field, you can be able to refer patients to patients to the movement. And encourage them to get involved or stay active, and there's such a good sense of community in the movement that could really do them some good, and encourage them to do the readings. So that 100% is the best thing you can do, I think. Like if my psychiatrist X started spouting Mad Studies jargon, I'd be like, I don't know, you don't really need to do that. Like, and so I think it's about staying impartial, and staying as impartial and detached as a medical professional should be, but having enough of a knowledge base about Mad Studies and about neurodiversity studies to refer them to the right readings, and to encourage them to get involved encourage your patients to get involved in the community. Yeah. So like, yeah.
Yeah, can I just say, I think we had in this two talks today, to yesterday and today, one from Kenya and one from the WHO, Norman Sartorius. And one of the things is that they say, we should all fight for resources. And the one David Ndete, he was very much saying, I think we have to educate the population, and he had very positive feedback from people in Kenya. So I think, and I'm working here, I worked in Germany, and I worked in, I'm working as a locum from time to time here, so in Britain. And there isn't that much of society or groups who would support each other, and there's very much individual support. But if you try, if you try to get into this whatever research agenda or national research agenda, getting people who are patients, who have whatever experience or who have relatives, and to be active is very difficult. And usually it's very much limited to their very much own experience. I think possibly when you teach more and more, your background gets a bit wider. So how do we get people motivated to work on this and participate, and maybe join the forces with psychiatry and clinical psychology?
Best I can say is to encourage patients to form communities amongst themselves more than to join psychology and psychiatry. I think if you encourage patients to form communities amongst themselves, then you're because if you're in the rigid structure of a hospital environment and you get a group of patients around a table and to do a survey or something about mental health or whatever, it's a very toxic environment. It's really a scary environment. I really wouldn't recommend that. If you're referring patients to a broader activist community, being like, here's something you might be interested in, go get involved, have fun. They're gonna make friends, they're gonna have a support network, somebody to notice if they've gone missing for a couple of days. And so it's something that builds trust with patients, and they can form that community. And then once a community is built, then that community can educate psychiatrists and psychologists like I'm doing now. And so I think the answer is to let the community build itself and to assist in building the community aside from psychiatry and psychology. And then once it is built up, then request like education opportunities like this one.
Okay. Is there any other questions? I think it was a very I think I'm quite proud of having invited you, and I'm quite happy that we did that. And I think it's a good opportunity to see the other side. And yeah, so if there's no other questions, so we will this talk will be available eventually somewhere on YouTube. So, but it will take me some time to reformat everything. So don't think it's tomorrow or yesterday. So thanks for coming, and I hope we keep in touch, and we will see what we can do. Thanks for coming, and thanks for your interesting talk. And I'd like to now to invite Daria, who would then introduce Giulio Torales. Is this correct? I think Giulio is already available. I think.
Yeah, I see you.
Okay, that's great. So I just okay, that's me done then.
Yeah, thank you.